Okay, hi everyone. I'm here today with my friend Will for today's Aspie interview. Will was diagnosed with Asperger's at the age of 6 and has done quite a few things since then. He's a lawyer and has been in the Australian Army and things like that. The theme for the whole of February is on the topic of employment. So if you're interested to discuss that a little bit more in an interactive online discussion, I'm running one at the end of the month. So have a look at the links below for that if you're interested. So a question that I like to ask everyone is, what is the thing that you like most about being on the autism spectrum?
The thing I like most about being on the autism spectrum is definitely being able to exist in my own world. Sometimes the outside world can be a little bit daunting or not particularly interesting, depending on what you're doing. And when I was a kid, I always found an escape in imagination. And there was a lot of creativity that came out of that, and that was expressed through the writing and the drawing and stuff I was doing in primary school, and all the artistic stuff I was doing in secondary school, and all the joy I get out of, still writing and reading fiction, particularly science fiction now. Sometimes I think my mind is a lot more interesting than the outside world. And you get a whole level of depth in your own mind when you're able to essentially disassociate yourself a little bit with the outside world, and I think being on the autism spectrum gives you a real unique ability to do that. And it gets to the extent where if you are deep in a dream sequence, for example, that operates in your subconscious, I still have a great deal of conscious control over what's happening within those dream sequences.
So you can control your dreams, basically.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So some of the subject matter, not so much, but the choices I'm making and how I navigate those choices, it's as if I was fully awake.
Sounds like it's like a virtual reality.
Yes.
Every night when you go to sleep.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
So imagination is a big thing.
Yeah, when I was in primary school, I was a big fan of Jurassic Park.
Jurassic Park.
Jurassic Park, the first one came out the year after I started prep. So it was a good time to be a 6-7-year-old kid who was obsessed with dinosaurs. My friends and I used to run around the schoolyard basically pretending we were different kinds of dinosaurs, and pretending the teachers were the game wardens and we had to avoid them. So I was one of the faster runners, so I was a velociraptor. And some of the larger, slower friends of mine were things like brachiosauruses or a Tyrannosaurus rex, depending on how aggressive they were. So I think that was one interesting element of having such a vivid imagination when I was a kid.
And I don't know about your experience, but I had some issues with authority when I sort of get on my track of what I would like to do, and they have a different idea, and it can be a little bit tough. And you ended up in the army.
I sure did.
How did that work?
So I should add that in primary school, a lot of the challenges I was having was with teachers, because I refused to engage in the curriculum because I was too busy drawing and writing about dinosaurs or tanks or airplanes or something like that. Grew up in a family with a lot of military history, and when I was in high school I was in the Army Cadets, so I started that quite early. Then when it came to the point where I was finishing high school, making the transition to the Army was really easy. I went to basic training 6 days after I graduated.
So what was attractive about that to you? I mean, I imagine it would be quite disciplined. How did that work out for you?
Well, there was a lot of discipline and routine. That was stuff which I all really enjoyed, because I had an interest in all things military quite early as well. So for example, getting out doing things in the mud and camping and firing a rifle, for example. And I think just having the opportunity to do that with a large group of people who all liked the same things I did and got a lot of enjoyment out of it, and being able to take an active leadership role and all that too was all really interesting. So essentially joining the full-time army was just playing that, but for real.
Yeah. So with regard to employment, I know I've found it difficult to find the right type of job fit for me personally, due to a variety of reasons, like the right amount of social contact, something I'm actually interested in doing, enough structure but not too rigid that I can't do things my way. So how have you managed all of those things in your own employment journey?
Sure. So I was always interested in pursuing a legal career, particularly in governance or working with corporate boards. So I worked in firms like PricewaterhouseCoopers, which are very rigid. They have a lot of structure built in, and there's not a lot of flexibility in the way in which you can do your work often. They do have some flexible practices there, but in reality my job wasn't that flexible.
Did you need that flexibility?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so it was flexibility around the place of work. When you've got 200 people on a floor and being quite sensory attuned, you can hear people walking on the other side of the building and all the conversations going on at once. Trying to concentrate on your work in amongst 400 different conversations is really challenging, and when you've got phones going off and printers going and all that sort of thing, so that wasn't really for me, just purely because of sensory issues, and they weren't prepared to make adjustments which would help me with that.
Which I guess is quite typical of really big companies.
Yeah.
I've definitely found that as well. Like the smaller the working unit, the easier it is to make little adjustments.
Yep. So they did try some things like having me come in a little bit earlier and leaving later, but the nature of the work was that I never got to leave later. Yeah. So the adjustment just ended up making me work for longer.
Yeah. I wish I couldn't relate to that, but unfortunately I can relate to that.
Yeah. The kind of spot I'm working in right now, I have my own office which I can close the door on. I have an extremely limited number of contacts who I have to work with, and I set my own schedule because I am the sole source of direction for this particular part of the organisation's business. So I have the right level of flexibility, the right level of social interaction, and the right level of noise control for me. So I find that I thrive a lot more in that environment.
So you seem to have done pretty well for yourself so far, sort of professionally.
Yeah.
What are some of the challenges you've had to overcome to get there?
Sure. I mean, there were challenges all the way through my school and career, basically. When I was diagnosed with autism, the school recommended that I be transferred to a specialist school.
Okay.
And that didn't occur, but I think the way in which the school managed those particular tendencies I had to not engage in curriculum wasn't particularly helpful. And then when it got to a point where I was in high school, again, a lot of the curriculum was hard to engage with, so I tended to focus on things which I really enjoyed, but that meant that finding the right kind of subjects to put me into a position where I could go directly into law was hard.
But law is not the easiest degree to get straight into,
No,
right?
It's not. But in order to get into it, you need to get a good sort of enter score or something like that. And I wasn't interested in things like math methods or physics or anything like that when I was going through high school. So I ended up getting a good enter score, but it just wasn't really one which was going to get me to where I was planning to in terms of a legal career. So the intention was to join the army, like I did, and then go to university as a mature age applicant.
Okay.
And go through that way. But then when I left the army and started applying, I kept getting rejected. And in fact, my application to study law was rejected 16 times.
Wow.
And that was really grinding to keep receiving those rejection letters and stuff like that.
Keep applying 16 times?
I had a very particular goal in mind about what I wanted to do with my career, and I took each letter very seriously, but didn't take that as a level of finality when it came to my plans to study law. So I always figured there would be a way. Okay. So I ended up studying commerce at Deakin University, and one of the subjects I majored in was commercial law. So it's a more simplified version of aspects of law with a commercial flair to it, and did very well in those subjects. And then when it came to the stage where I was applying to study law again, one of the reasons UNSW mentioned for taking me on was my outcomes in those subjects. So it was just finding the right point and the right university. And yeah, that I think I could have given up much earlier than that. So I think it was just having a very clear goal in mind and refusing to budge.
So you would count
That
being
was helpful.
So you would count being incredibly stubborn.
Incredibly stubborn.
As one of your talents?
Doggedly so.
Doggedly stubborn.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So one of my special interests is emotional intelligence.
Yes, it is.
And so another question I like to ask people is, what's something that you've had success with recently in terms of, I don't know, self-awareness or in relationships or something in that regard?
Okay, so in a purely emotional space, I have tended in the past to not be overly emotionally engaged, and that's created some challenges with connecting with people on a personal level. But more recently, I've made a very conscious effort to try and understand how people are thinking and feeling.
Okay.
So I think it's just being someone who's proactive and saying, well, this is what I think, how does that make you feel? Is there anything I need to know? And checking with people more regularly about what they're thinking and feeling has been very helpful for me with some of my more personal relationships.
Okay, so proactively checking in. Yeah, okay, because if you just assume something and that assumption is wrong and you don't check in, then that can have consequences later down the track.
Previously, I've tried to infer what people might be thinking and feeling, and I have acknowledged and I realise I do a very poor job of inferring how people are thinking and feeling. And the key example is silence.
Okay.
So if you don't hear from that person,
what does it mean? Yeah.
Often the inference I make is a negative one, and that's almost never the case. But that's always the default proposition that my mind puts up. So by checking in with people, I can allay those negative sort of suppositions about what people are thinking and feeling, and then actually going to greater steps to figure that out.
Before you react to the perceived negative, and then all of a sudden you're angry and they don't know why you're angry.
Exactly. Like what's going on? And I'd say, well, I thought this, but they're like, well, actually no, that's not what I was thinking at all. And you always think, if only I'd asked, or if only I knew, and this is now how I know.
Okay, great, good strategy. Okay, well, thanks, Will, for coming along and talking to us today. I've realised recently that one of my great weaknesses is saying goodbye. I never quite get around to saying the right thing, and I end up rambling forever. So I'm trying not to do that.
You just awkwardly cut the camera. That's what you do.
Awkwardly cut the... No, I won't do that. So hopefully you've enjoyed this. I'll be doing more Aspie interviews throughout the year. So yeah, thanks again, Will. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again later. Bye.